Alan Crawford is a well-revered architect known for his innovative and progressive work, particularly in the area of future living. Currently, half of humanity live in a city, which equates to almost 3.5 billion of us, a figure predicted to rapidly rise to 5 billion by 2030. Alan's experienced in the field of rapid urban expansion and highly regarded for his ability to maximise space for residential developments by building down. Let's hear more. Welcome to the Designerati podcast. Alan, we meet again. Pleasure to have you here. Now, I met you first around 12 years ago. You haven't changed.
It's very kind of you.
Still look the same.
You haven't changed either.
Still, I was waiting for that. Very good. Still look the same. Now, we have a little bit of a format, which we start with an icebreaker. So, Alan, can you start by telling us something that our viewers and our listeners wouldn't necessarily associate with you? You can either show us or tell us a little bit of a story.
I don't have any kind of sort of bodily foibles as such. So, I used to think I could wiggle my ears, but I'm definitely not going to try it today. I need a few drinks first, usually. What I do that probably most people don't associate me with is I take pictures of the moon quite frequently, and I'm just fascinated by that heavenly orb up there. And every time I seem to come home from work, it's usually dark. And we're quite fortunate in London because we have quite dark, clear skies a lot. And there it is, and it must be 8 years ago, I suppose, I started, I thought I'll try and take a picture. And I'm not a professional, I do it all by hand. So I've got a nice camera. I've got several cameras, but the one I like is the Sony Nex. It's very lightweight. And I just point it out the window, try and keep my hand steady, no stand or anything, set it manually, and take maybe a dozen shots of the different sequences, different phases of the moon. And I've got thousands of them now. My wife thinks I'm crazy.
If NASA were to call you up and grant you a place, yes or no?
I've always wanted, I'm already signed up on Elon Musk's Mars mission, jokingly, but NASA were publishing tickets, get your ticket to go to Mars. So I'm there, my email is anyway, but I would go tomorrow. I think it's all part of the way that humans love to explore. And I've always been a bit like that, ever since I was a kid. I was lucky in many respects because Dad, when I was very young, he always worked abroad. I didn't see him much, actually, so maybe I was lucky there as well. But what it did do, when I was very young, it gave me the opportunity to go to far-off places. When I was 12 years old, I went to Africa. And because my dad was working there in Nigeria, and I used to go out for the school holidays, whereas Mum and my sister were living with Dad at the time, and it was just, you imagine it's not far now. You can fly there in about 8 hours, but as a 12-year-old, it was like going to another planet, and. I was a member of the Junior Jet Club, BOAC.
Congratulations.
And in those days, when you were a member of the Junior Jet Club, the pilot would invite you into, the cabin, and you'd get to sit next to the pilot as he's flying. It was a Super VC-10.
And what an experience.
It was.
Because you can't sit in the cockpit anymore.
Well, I have since. I've been in the cockpit of a jumbo jet as well, landing in I think it was the Seychelles, on my way to Mauritius. And I had a friend who was in the airline business, and they arranged for me to go into the cockpit on landing and takeoff. And when you're in the Seychelles, it's a very short runway, and you've got this huge jumbo jet, and you just think he's never going to make it. He's never going to make it, and and suddenly you hit the tarmac, and there's only a couple of 100 meters to put the brakes on, but they always managed to do it. It was fantastic, great experience.
Fortunately,
I'm really envious of this sort of flying and the astronaut thing. So yeah, I would go in an instant if they offered me a position.
so the moon and travel is very much high up on your passion list.
Absolutely.
How is your career trajectory into architecture?
At school, I was always drawing. I wasn't really interested in mathematics and science, chemistry, physics, biology. I studied them, but I loved art, and so I was always, getting a pencil out. I didn't play with toys like a lot of kids did. I was just drawing all the time, and I used to get comics, so it'd be like DC comics in those days, and Superman, Batman, and I was always trying to sort of copy these superheroes, and then sort of graduated from that. And then in my secondary school, secondary grammar school, I was mostly doing art in my final years. I had a brilliant set of art teachers, and they sort of introduced me to history of architecture, Vitruvius, and his sort of tenets, which are firmness, commodity, and delight. That's, he said, you need to combine these characteristics to create a beautiful building, a lasting building. And so firmness, commodity, and delight are something that kind of hang in there from school days. And then I never even dreamed about going to architecture school. I wanted to go to art school. And so I sort of built up a portfolio.
Of what?
Of drawings, and I love doing portraiture and the human form. And so I was always drawing faces and people. And I built up this portfolio, and I applied to Edinburgh Art College. And they wanted to take me in and give me a position. And then it was that eureka moment when Mum and Dad weren't there a lot when I was at that age. They were working, Dad was working overseas most of the time, and I was living with my grandma in our big house in Edinburgh, which was another thing that kind of really drove me towards architecture. When I was 6 years old, Mum and Dad managed to get a deposit together for a Georgian house in the new town of Edinburgh, and it had like 4 meter high, 13 foot high ceilings, and it felt like a palace. I was 6 years old, and they had nothing. They could barely afford to put furniture in it at the time, but they got it at a very good deal. And so growing up in that environment, I was sort of surrounded by beautiful Georgian architecture for most of my teens. And so this combination of the art and growing up in Edinburgh was kind of steering me in a direction. But because my dad was working as an engineer for a very large construction company, it was the biggest construction company in the world at the time, he was saying, why do you want to go into art? What are you going to be, an art teacher? Are you going to be the next Picasso, or what are you going to do?
And our parents are so influential.
Yeah, and it kind of was a bit of a eureka moment. And I thought, well, maybe he's right. What do you suggest? And he said, well, in the construction world, the quantity surveyor is a very highly thought of profession. And I thought, well, what does a quantity surveyor do, Dad? Well, he works out how much everything's going to cost. And I thought, well, that sounds really interesting. Is there anything else do you think I could do? And he said, well, what about architecture? So I thought, yeah, that kind of combines the drawing, and I was passionate about art. And he said, well, why not apply? The company that he was working for did like apprenticeships, and in those days that was quite a good way of getting into a profession, and they sort of subsidized you as well, but you had to work at the same time. When you were not at college, you had to work for the company. But that was also good because they moved me around different places in the UK. So I ended up inadvertently, I suppose you could say. I had an interview with, he was the head architect in Edinburgh, and I showed him my portfolio, and the guy said, yeah, you can draw. I need to send you to London now. And then I got down to London on the train, and the guy, the head architect, the head honcho in architecture in this big organization, lovely guy, and he looked at my portfolio and he said, very nice, and I'd like to recommend you. And it was Brighton College of Art where the course was, and I thought, wow, fantastic. I can't get any further away from Edinburgh if I tried without falling into the sea. So I said, I'm off, and I was like 19 years old, I think, at the time. And I was kind of lucky because Mum and Dad, although they weren't there, they shelled out a little bit, and they got me a little car. And so when I was 18, I was driving around in a Ford Anglia with bucket seats.
Congratulations,
I
you
thought
have
I'd
made it.
I thought I'd made it, and a sort of leather steering wheel. And I actually packed all my stuff into the Ford Anglia. I didn't have that much, but packed it all into the Ford Anglia and drove down, I think it was the A1 at the time I drove down. I don't think it was the M1. And it seemed to take forever. I think it was like 12 hours to get from Edinburgh to Brighton. But that was the start of fantastic times.
Part of your DNA is that you're an entrepreneur. So combine that with your ability to draw, and then I'm doing a bit of quick maths. You've been in the industry for around 30 years. And I'm wondering, how has architecture evolved or not?
It's evolved in terms of career. It's an interesting one because when I did get my RIBA qualifications, I thought, I don't really want to work in this country. I want to do something different. And so for a year, I worked in East Croydon on quite a big job. Actually, it was it's still there. The Bank of America's sort of central headquarters, and so I was living in Putney at the time, and I was driving down in my Ford Anglia.
Living the dream.
Living the dream down to East Croydon every morning, and we were on site, and it was fantastic, being on site, because I'd been learning about architecture, and I'd had some experience with my years out or my time out working in an office, but this was the real deal, steel concrete building, piled foundations, glass facade. My task for about a year was designing two things: curtain walling, which is the glazing that wraps around glass buildings, and concrete finishes. Which, when the students come to work for me now, and I say, well, we need to do a door schedule or something like that, they go, oh, really? Do we have to?
Really? Is that the graveyard?
Oh, that's the graveyard, yeah. And but because I was assigned to the curtain walling, and it was such an important part of the building, I really enjoyed it, and it was a great camaraderie as well, because it was in the age before computers and CAD were really there, so everybody was using drawing boards in the office about this size. And
aren't they one of the most exquisite pieces of furniture? An original drawing board.
Yes, I mean, when I was in I think the last year of my degree, so that was in third year, I did a private job, and it was like it was an extension it was an interesting one, to a farm, and it was for a vet down in East Sussex, and he had a lion and he kept a lion literally on a chain in a barn, and the RSPCA had got hold of this information, and they said, I'm sorry, you can't keep that lion in the barn anymore. You're going to need to have some sort of a cage for it. So I designed this animal house, I suppose, for a lion, and I went there once. It was a bit scary. And I think I got paid something like 150 quid, which was a lot of money back then. And I bought this amazing, it was like a pneumatic drawing board and parallel motion. So I just pressed a little lever here and it went from the horizontal up like that. So I could stand and draw or sit on a high chair. And then if I wanted to do something more like this, just pop it down, sketch out, whatever.
I guess that's one of the most obvious ways that architecture's transformed itself through the years. The use of original hand drawing to nowadays CAD, all the different technologies that's available.
It is, and I'm not ashamed to say I don't use CAD, but I don't use CAD. And I don't need to, because there's lots of young budding architects out there who are much more fluent, doing that type of using that media than I could. But what I do is I do a lot of sketches still. So if somebody comes to me, it's a bit of a long story, but if somebody comes to me with a brief and it's a new house, let's say, I think it through in my head. I very rarely put pencil to paper first, in the first instance. So I'm kind of listening to what they're thinking about in terms of, bedrooms, bathrooms, whatever it might be, and then I know what the site is because we've already visited, and the context is usually a driving force towards the design, especially on our tiny houses. They're always in difficult locations, so I'm thinking it through in my head, and I'm designing it actually in my head.
And I wonder if that comes through the benefit of the experience that you have, an intuition, just an inner wisdom.
I think it does. I've seen some young people who have an ability. Over the years we've employed many young students, and I've seen a few that have this ability to be able to visualize things three-dimensionally in their head, but not many. And the other thing I do, and clients are always amused by this, is it's like, do you have any ideas? They say, do you have any ideas? What's the concept going to be? And I said, well, actually, I dreamt about it last night.
Do you dream?
I dream, that's how sad I am. I dream architecture. And I dream the solution, so we've got a project in Ealing at the moment, and it's like somebody came to us and they've got 6 lock-up garages, semi-derelict. They're not used for car parking anymore because they're too small. And he wanted to put some houses on there, and we just finished something nearby, and he liked what we'd done, and that's how we got the commission. And I was thinking it through, and there's all the context was that there's this 4-story period building to the south. There's another 4-story period building to the north. To the back, there's a huge tree. To the front, there's a massive tree, and to the side, there's a lime tree. And then these 6 garages. And I wanted to do 2 houses, and they're not sort of like conventional pastiche, copies of the period style around. But we're looking at, where can we put windows? How can we bring the light in? How can we model the roof? How can we set back the floors? Do we need to dig down to get all the accommodation the client wants, which we do? And then, I had all this rattling around like a cocktail in my brain. And I remember going to bed and dreaming this kind of solution. And then so the next day, I sketched out something, And, it's now materialized into a three-dimensional form with the guys put it on computer and everything.
Which is based on your dreamt concept.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's, it's not the only time, it's some bigger projects as well. And I quite like that, because, we spend about a third of our life sleeping. And I think, what a waste of time, And,
and now you can monetize it. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. And
one of the key buzzwords at the moment, for a few years now, has been sustainability, and I'm interested in how you're integrating that into your work and practice.
Yeah, it has been for a few years, but going back many years, at least 20, we were talking the same talk. We weren't walking the same walk that we're walking now. But we were certainly talking the same talk as architects and engineers, I think, as well, in fairness. But clients weren't interested. They didn't realize that, we had a fast approaching climate crisis, global warming, rising temperatures. They didn't really... Well, maybe they cared, but it seemed to be like an unnecessary add-on to what was already quite an expensive process. And energy was relatively cheap. But then along came, about 20 years ago, another unsung hero, an architect called Bill Dunster. And I know Martin has interviewed Bill a few years ago. And I say unsung hero because over 20 years ago, he was talking this talk, but he was actually practicing. He was looking at designs, energy saving, sustainable designs, and he built a building called Bedzed, which was quite groundbreaking at the time, and it kind of transformed, I think, the way that architects began to think after that. Because here was a living, breathing example of what you could do to run, low energy buildings, recycling heat, high insulated buildings, using what is called a fabric first approach. So make sure the building is well insulated and sealed. I'm not altogether convinced about the sealed buildings all the time, but since then, other architects have sort of strived to follow suit, and Bill is still there, and I think he deserves an accolade for really pushing something at the time which was really being swept under the carpet, and now ever since the Paris Agreement in 2015, and try and keep global warming under 1.5 degrees. It's on, everybody's concerned about it, and construction is one of the major contributors to global warming. And so, in terms of what we do now, we just finished an interesting little house in Ealing, which was a double garage, and client was a dad. And he wanted to get his son on the property ladder, his son sort of in early 30s. And the garage was not really doing anything. As I said, most of these garages are too small to park SUVs and things in today. So he said, do you think you could get planning permission for a 2-story house on this site?
How many square metres are we talking about?
Well, the plot is about 50 square metres. So it's like... the house is just under 100 square metres, but it's heavily constrained because it's got other properties on 3 sides, each side and at the back. So main windows have to be at the front, looking out onto the street, which is okay because it's looking out onto the backs of other gardens opposite and trees and everything, looking east. So we designed, and he quite liked Art Deco style, and I quite like Art Deco style also. But it had to be quite simple because he had a limited budget. Well, I say limited. It still is quite expensive, but if I put it in perspective, you probably couldn't buy a 1-bedroom 50 square meter flat for the same price as we built the building for. And so this little 2-story house, it's a little gem, I think, is it's got solar panels, it's got an air source heat pump, so it doesn't have conventional gas boiler. It's got mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, so it's pulling fresh air in. The extracted air is sort of filtered and warmed again. You've talked about it, I think, in the past, and then recycled. Although Daniel, who's the young boy, likes to open the windows, so that's kind of, you shouldn't open the windows with your MVHR. It's got underfloor heating throughout, so the air source heat pump sends low temperature hot water to an underfloor heating system in a concrete floor at ground floor and first floor, which we did. I mean, we could have built the first floor in timber, but it doesn't function quite as well with the underfloor heating. And it's got triple glazing on the front as well. So it's fabric first approach, so it's highly insulated, and you could really keep it warm on a light bulb, and he's delighted, thankfully.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so I mean, but again, it's something that a few years ago there was something called the Code for Sustainable Homes, and every new house had to comply with. There was level 1 to 6, and I think if it was over 4, it was just about there. If it was 6, it was like top notch, and we could never really get 6 because the clients just wouldn't spend what was necessary to achieve that, and then it got abandoned because I'm guessing the government thought it was just an expensive add-on at that point in time. But now, of course, with climate change and global warming, we can't do enough, and of course our IBA have set architects on a mission, zero carbon by 2050 or earlier, if we can, which is not going to be easy to achieve, particularly at the moment.
Does there always have to be a positive cost association with achieving sustainability? For me, that's a barrier to entry.
It is. It is a bit, but now, in their infinite wisdom, the government have actually introduced a £5,000 grant towards installation of an air source heat pump or something.
Where do we
clean
find out
energy.
about that?
It's going to kick off in April, and initially there's a limited number of grants available, and we've already encouraged several of our clients to sign up for it. And it's mainly for retrofit, so it's not for a new build. I've always said, about 2 years ago, I was when we were in lockdown, I was tweeting Rishi Sunak all the time. Why don't you take VAT off renovations? I never got an answer, of course, but interestingly, they're removing VAT on, I think, things like air source heat pumps now.
Good for you.
As well. Well, I think a lot of my colleagues in the architectural world feel the same. One thing that is interesting, and I think it's something we talk about a lot, is that in the drive towards zero carbon by 2050, 80% of the buildings that will be around in 2050 are already here, in the form of Victorian houses, Georgian houses, period buildings. They're already here, and they will be around in 2050. So that only leaves 20% new buildings that are going to be contributing towards, reducing our carbon emissions. So we really need to be focusing on, the existing buildings, and that is a major task. And at the moment, new buildings are zero rated for VAT, and you still have to pay 20% on refurbishments. And that's off-putting
Something
for
for
many
review.
clients.
Something for review.
Yeah.
Building down.
Yes.
So we build up, we build down, or we build out.
Mm.
And you have an expertise in building down. What does that mean?
Well, what it specifically means is that for many of the properties that we get asked to look at, our clients might already have gone up. They might have gone out to the back or the sides, and they still want more space. They need more space for some reason. And so the only alternative left is to go down. And
I've been reading about all these basement excavations in central London, and aren't neighbours becoming infuriated by this process?
They are. They're called icebergs. So like 2/3 of the house is below ground and the other third is above ground. And there's been some huge disputes, quite famous disputes. We recently completed a double basement in Knightsbridge.
What's a double basement?
It's like a basement below a basement. So it's 2 levels of basement. So it's not quite the iceberg, but it's getting towards that. And I do feel sympathy for the neighbours. It's a difficult process. It's quite noisy construction. There's lots of risks attached to it. And, infamously, there have been a few collapses of properties when basements have been constructed. Not any of ours, thankfully.
But these are popular choices. Gary Neville, the footballer, he built 8,000 square feet, mostly underground.
Yes.
What are some of the positives?
Some of the positives are, if you do it properly, they can be amazing. And when I say do it properly, I mean you need to introduce natural daylight, sunlight, mainly those 2 ingredients. And so, the way that the windows are orientated might contribute towards that. So when we're digging on our small houses, it's usually inevitable that we will create a basement. And this started, again, about 20 years ago with one client who came to us with a property in Islington. And it was a rundown sort of MOT garage and a tin shack, basically, on the end of this beautiful crescent, period Georgian buildings. And directly opposite were living Tony and Cherie Blair. I didn't know that at the time, but Cherie used to come out with a cup of tea. No, she didn't.
This is you dreaming again.
This was me dreaming. But no, we did get to meet her actually on a couple of occasions because she was interested in what was going on. So we had a very adventurous client, and he said, well, why don't we build a basement here? And it was the first time we'd really looked at it, the possibility. So we ended up with this 3-story house, basement, ground, and a sort of set-back mezzanine first floor with a copper barrel roof. There's no garden to this particular house. And we decided we were going to put 2 bedrooms in the basement. And so what we did was we created an enclosed light well that punches down into the lower level. And each bedroom has got sliding glass folding doors rather than a solid wall. So when the bedrooms are not being used for sleeping, you could just open the doors completely and the space flowed into the bedrooms and out again. And up above there was just glass. You press a button and the glazing just opens, so you could have this indoor or outdoor experience. And that was the first time we did it, and then we sort of marketed that as the upside down house, turning the typical house upside down, putting the bedrooms down in the basement. It kind of made sense, because most of the time you're in bed, what are you doing? You're lying there with your eyes closed, not admiring the view. And then putting the more important spaces up where all the light and the space and the view.
Well, the spaces that were actually wide awake and using most of the time whilst we're wide awake.
Exactly. And I mean, now we use bedrooms in slightly different ways because of the sort of home working revolution. But I think it still works, and we're designing some houses exactly with that principle at the moment. So, but other advantages are when you sink something into the ground, you've got added insulation, the soil itself. So you're improving, I think it's something like 15% efficiency over and above having that wall above ground, because the soil acts as an insulant.
Less construction costs, less walls.
Yeah,
External
the biggest issue for us at the moment is that because of some of the failures that you've read about in the press of basements leaking, especially when we're getting now with climate change, we're getting a lot of flash flood situations, and London's experienced them a lot in the last few years. It's very difficult for architects to get professional indemnity insurance to cover the cost of building basements, and many are just saying, okay, we're not going to do basements anymore.
Right, that's something to watch out for. That's a useful piece of information. Why have we got a cake here? What have you kindly brought?
Well, I've been listening to a few of the video podcasts, and I saw these lovely yellow mugs, and yellow is one of my favourite colours. Actually, it's and these are really beautiful mugs.
I sense a criticism.
No. I'm being serious. I like Mondrian as an artist, and yellow primary colour is one of his. Is the colours he uses a lot. So, I mean, even on one of our houses we've just finished a couple of years ago, it's completely black, the house, mostly because the client wanted it that way. So the brickwork is black, the wood cladding on the first floor is something called shusugiban, which is charred larch. It originated in Japan. So it's wood that's been set on fire intentionally, but it gives it a protection, a patina that protects it. And then the brickwork goes inside, and the only thing that has colour is the front door and the number. And what colour is it? Yellow. Yellow and black really contrast,
Pop.
as you can see here,
So coming back to the cake.
So the cake, well, I in watching your video podcasts previously, I saw these two mugs looking a little bit sorry for themselves, unaccompanied by anything. So I thought I would bring you a cake.
Where's this from?
This is from my favourite patisserie in North London called Dunn's, and they do amazing cakes and all sorts of things there. So this is a sacateur.
Is that a sacateur? Pair of scissors?
It's not quite a pair of scissors.
How gorgeous! Can you see that?
Well, I thought you might like a piece of that, to go with your water.
We will love that, and we'd like to share that as well. That is delicious. Thank you so much. How thoughtful is that? So just remember, next time you come on a Designerati podcast, to bring cakes. They're always welcome. You are a pleasure, and I look forward to working with you again and our paths crossing, and thank you for being such an inspiration and just bringing such a wealth of knowledge and experience to this delightful industry. Alan, thank you. Keep watching the moon and enjoying the moon.
Well, thank you.
Now, wasn't that fascinating? If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please do like and subscribe. We are here every Monday chatting to loads of different types of architects and interior designers. See you then.